The galaxy had always been full of noise, ships moving between planets, battles flaring up between rival empires, and rulers declaring their power across the stars. Yet on that particular day, inside the grand palace of the alien queen, everything was quiet. It was a heavy silence, the kind that pressed down on the chest and made every soldier, every servant, and every guest in the hall hold their breath. The queen's armor, the very symbol of her strength, had been damaged. It wasn't just any armor. This was the suit that had carried her through countless battles, that had made enemies bow down and allies respect her name. It was more than metal, more than energy shields and glowing circuits. It was her identity. Without it, she looked less like the untouchable leader everyone feared and more like a warrior who could be defeated. That thought alone spread unease among her people. The battle that had damaged the armor was sudden and brutal. A group of raiders from a distant system had ambushed her fleet. Though she fought them off with her usual skill, a strike from a powerful weapon had torn across her armor's chest plate. The glowing energy lines that once shone bright were flickering like a candle ready to go out. Everyone in the palace could see it, and though no one dared to say it aloud, they all knew this was dangerous. The queen stood tall, even with the crack in her armor, her sharp eyes moving over the rows of her alien craftsmen and guards. "Who will fix my armor?" she demanded, her voice echoing like thunder through the hall. The words carried not only power but warning. To refuse her meant disrespect. To accept and fail meant punishment. Not a single craftsman stepped forward. They lowered their heads, afraid of meeting her gaze. Some shuffled nervously, their hands twitching, their mouths dry. The armor was too important, too sacred. To work on it and make a mistake would mean ruin, perhaps even death. One by one, they stayed silent, hoping someone else would volunteer. But no one did. The queen's anger grew. Her sharp armored fingers clenched into a fist and her voice rose even louder. "Is there no one in this hall with courage?" The sound rattled the tall crystal pillars and sent a shiver through those standing nearby. In the shadows, at the edge of the chamber, stood a lone human. His name was Daniel. He wasn't a soldier, nor was he one of the queen's advisors. He was an engineer from Earth, sent as part of an exchange program to learn about alien technology and observe how their machines worked. He wasn't supposed to interfere in matters of the court. His job was simple: take notes, learn quietly, and report back to his people one day. But Daniel's heart beat faster as he watched the queen and her broken armor. He could see the energy leaks, the damaged circuits, and the stress lines running across the material. To most, it looked hopeless, too advanced to repair without special knowledge. But to him, it was a challenge. Machines were his language. He had spent years fixing satellites in orbit, repairing crashed ships and restoring broken tools. What others saw as impossible, he often saw as a puzzle waiting to be solved. He knew stepping forward would be dangerous. He was just a human, in a room full of towering aliens, each one stronger and faster than him. The queen herself could end him with a single strike if he failed. His mind told him to stay silent, to keep his head down like the others, but something inside him pushed harder. He thought of all the times he had taken risks back on Earth, repairing machines in storms, working with no backup, trusting only his hands and his mind. If he could do it then, why not now? His voice came out quieter than he expected, but in the silence of the hall, it carried. "I can fix it," Daniel said. Heads turned sharply. The aliens stared at him as though he had just spoken nonsense. Some even frowned, whispering to one another. A human? Fix the queen's sacred armor? It was unthinkable. The queen's eyes narrowed, glowing faintly as she turned her head toward him. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze sharp enough to cut stone. Daniel felt the weight of it but stood his ground. His legs wanted to tremble, but he forced them still. "You," the queen said, her deep voice filled with disbelief. "A human?" Daniel nodded once. His throat was dry, but his words were steady. "Yes, I can fix it." For a long moment the hall was frozen. The guards gripped their weapons tighter. The craftsmen looked at one another, some with curiosity, others with pity. They believed this small human had just signed his own fate. But the queen did not dismiss him. Something in his tone caught her attention. She could sense he wasn't boasting, nor was he begging for recognition. He simply spoke as though it was a fact. That alone made her pause. She stepped closer, her heavy armor creaking slightly, the damaged chest plate still flickering weakly. She towered over Daniel, her shadow swallowing him whole. "If you fail," she said coldly, "there will be no second chance." Daniel looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I won't fail." The hall buzzed with whispers. The queen tilted her head, then raised one hand. With a sharp gesture, she ordered the guards to step aside. "Bring him to the repair chamber," she commanded. And just like that, the fate of a lone human engineer changed forever. He walked behind the queen as the guards led them through glowing corridors into a chamber filled with tools and strange machines. The air smelled of hot metal and charged energy. The armor was placed carefully on a raised platform, its broken pieces glowing dimly. Daniel stepped forward, his hands already moving as his mind mapped out the work ahead. Behind him, the queen watched in silence. She had given him the chance, but she still did not believe. The hall outside waited, ready to hear either his success or his failure. Daniel took a deep breath. For him, it wasn't just about fixing armor. It was about proving that courage and skill could matter more than size or strength. And so, with steady hands and a focused heart, he began. The repair chamber was unlike anything Daniel had seen before. The walls glowed with a soft blue light and floating tools hung in the air, waiting to be used. Strange machines hummed quietly, some projecting images, others pulsing with unknown energy. Alien symbols blinked across panels and metallic arms moved slowly as if alive. To the Queen's people, this was the most advanced repair bay in their empire. To Daniel, it was both intimidating and exciting. The Queen stood behind him, tall and silent, her presence filling the chamber like a storm waiting to break. Around her, guards lined the walls, their sharp eyes fixed on Daniel. None trusted him. They believed he would fail, and many expected the Queen's patience would end quickly. Yet Daniel didn't look at them. His eyes were locked on the armor. The armor was massive, larger than Daniel himself. Its dark plates were covered in glowing lines that flickered weakly, like stars dying out. A deep crack ran across the chest piece and several smaller breaks spread across the arms and shoulders. Sparks popped occasionally, the way a broken wire does when it struggles to carry power. For most, this was frightening. For Daniel, it was familiar. He had seen broken machines before, though never of this scale. The language of repair, however, was the same everywhere. Find the problem, understand it, and restore it. He placed his hand gently on the armor, ignoring the whispers. Behind him, the surface was cold, almost lifeless, but beneath it he could feel the faint hum of energy. He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying his thoughts. Then, with quiet confidence, he began to work. First, he studied the cracks. The alien material wasn't like steel or titanium. It was something between metal and crystal. It carried energy like a conductor, but also protected like a shield. He ran his fingers along the broken edges, noticing how the fractures spread in patterns. "The strike hit here," he murmured softly, pointing to the center of the chest plate. It forced the energy lines to overload, and the shock spread outward. One of the alien craftsmen snorted from the side. "How could a human know this?" He whispered harshly. Another replied, "He is only guessing. He will fail soon enough." Daniel ignored them. He crouched down, examining the flickering energy lines. Using the tools provided, he carefully connected a scanner. The machine projected a hologram of the armor, glowing in 3 dimensions. He studied the flow of energy, tracing where it was, blocked and where it leaked. His eyes narrowed in focus. "Interesting," he said softly. "Your technology channels energy like blood through veins. When one path breaks, the others weaken." The Queen's eyes sharpened. Few of her own craftsmen could explain the armor so clearly. Yet this human spoke as if he had known it for years. Daniel worked slowly but surely. He removed broken fragments with care, never rushing. He cleaned the burned edges, smoothing them to prepare for bonding. Sparks flew as he repaired small circuits, his hands steady even when the tools vibrated sharply. Sweat formed on his forehead, but he didn't stop. Every movement carried purpose. Hours passed. The guards grew restless, shifting their weight, but Daniel remained focused. The queen never moved, her gaze fixed on him. She had seen warriors fight with swords, generals lead armies, and scholars speak with wisdom. But this human, small and fragile compared to her kind, worked with a courage that reminded her of all three. At one point, the energy surged violently, causing the chamber lights to flicker. Gasps filled the room, and one guard stepped forward, ready to end Daniel's attempt. But Daniel raised a hand quickly. "Wait, it's only a surge. The system is stabilizing." He adjusted a few connections, and within moments, the glow of the armor steadied. The room fell silent again. The queen tilted her head slightly. "You did not fear the surge," she said, her voice low but filled with curiosity. Daniel didn't look up. "Fear doesn't fix broken machines," he replied, calmly. "Focus does." The craftsmen who had doubted him now exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected failure, but instead they were watching something remarkable. Piece by piece, Daniel restored the armor. The cracks were sealed with a bonding process he adapted from Earth techniques, combining them with the alien tools he had learned to use. The energy lines glowed brighter with each repair, no longer flickering but pulsing strongly like a beating heart. The sparks stopped, replaced by a smooth, steady hum. Daniel's hands moved with precision, but inside his mind thoughts raced. He knew one mistake could undo everything. He thought of Earth, of the long nights he spent fixing satellites alone, of the broken machines no one believed could work again. Those moments had prepared him for this one. He was no soldier, no leader, but he knew how to repair what others thought impossible. Finally, after what felt like endless hours, Daniel stepped back. His chest rose and fell heavily, his clothes stained with grease and dust. But the armor, once broken and lifeless, now shone brightly. The energy flowed through it in smooth patterns, glowing with renewed strength. The queen slowly stepped forward, her towering frame casting a long shadow over him. She placed her hand on the chest plate, feeling the steady pulse of power. Her eyes widened slightly. The armor was not only restored, it was stronger than before. The room was silent. Every guard, every craftsman, every servant held their breath. The queen raised her arm slowly, testing the joints. The armor responded perfectly, smooth and flawless. She clenched her fist, and the sound of power vibrated through the chamber. Then, without warning, she released a wave of energy that shook the walls. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the guards staggered backward. Gasps filled the air. The armor was alive again. The queen turned sharply, her voice thundering through the chamber. "Who fixed my armor?" Her roar echoed like a storm, demanding an answer. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and tense. Then, covered in dust but standing tall, Daniel lifted his head. His voice was steady, clear, and without pride. Only truth. "I did." The words rang out, simple yet powerful. The hall, the guards, even the craftsmen froze. A lone human had answered the queen's roar. The silence after Daniel's words felt heavier than the strongest armor. Every alien in the chamber stared at him, their expressions a mixture of shock, disbelief, and confusion. A human, small, fragile, and considered insignificant in their eyes, had not only dared to touch the queen's sacred armor, but had succeeded where none of them even dared to try. The queen's glowing eyes locked onto Daniel. She towered above him, her repaired armor humming with power, its light filling the chamber like the rising sun. Her sharp features revealed no smile, no anger, only a deep intensity that made the air grow thick. Slowly, she stepped closer to him. Each step echoed against the crystal floor, sounding louder with the weight of her authority. Daniel stood still, his hands still covered in grease, his face streaked with sweat and dust. He didn't bow. He didn't lower his head. Instead, he kept his gaze steady. He had spoken the truth, and he would not take it back. The queen stopped only a few feet away, her presence overwhelming. Then her voice thundered through the chamber. "You, a human, fixed my armor?" Daniel nodded once. Yes. His answer was simple, calm, and certain. The guards shifted uneasily. Some tightened their grips on their weapons, expecting punishment to fall on him at any moment. The craftsman whispered nervously, unsure if this strange act of courage would be rewarded or destroyed. For generations, no one had spoken so directly to the queen. For a long moment, the queen said nothing. She raised her arms, moving them slowly, as the armor adjusted perfectly to her movements. She clenched her fist again, feeling the flawless response of the restored systems. Energy rippled across her body, brighter and smoother than before. Then, with sudden force, she released another surge of power. This time it was stronger, a wave of energy that rattled the walls, shook the floor, and made the guards stumble back. The craftsmen shielded their eyes from the blinding glow. Yet Daniel stood firm, the wave brushing past him without breaking his stance. He felt its power, but he did not waver. The queen's eyes narrowed as she studied him. Slowly she lowered, her hand, and the chamber grew quiet again. "Stronger," she muttered, almost to herself. Then louder, her voice carrying across the chamber. "My armor is stronger than before." The word sent a ripple through the room. The aliens gasped, exchanging astonished looks. Not only had the human repaired the sacred armor, he had improved. The queen turned back to Daniel, her tall frame casting a long shadow over him. "How?" she demanded. Daniel met her gaze, his voice steady. "I studied the fractures, the way the energy flowed. I didn't only replace what was broken, I rebuilt the channels so the power would move more smoothly. On Earth, we learned that sometimes repairing is not enough. You must make it better than it was." The queen tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. She had expected fear, excuses, perhaps even trembling pride, but what she saw was honesty and simplicity. He spoke not to boast, but to explain. His words were not filled with arrogance, but with clarity. The guards glanced at one another. They had never heard anyone speak to their queen in such a way. The craftsmen shifted uneasily, some glaring at Daniel with jealousy, others watching, with quiet admiration. The queen took another step closer, now so near that Daniel could feel the energy radiating from her armor. "You risked failure. You risked your life." "Why?" Daniel's answer came without hesitation. "Because it needed to be done." The chamber fell silent again. His words were simple, but they carried weight. He had not spoken of glory, reward, or even duty. He had acted because it was the right thing to do. The queen studied him for a long moment. Her sharp gaze softened slightly, just enough for those who knew her to notice. She turned slowly, facing the room full of her people. "This human," she said in a voice that carried like thunder, "has done what none of you dared. He has restored my armor. He has shown skill, courage, and truth." The hall erupted into whispers. Some aliens bowed their heads, ashamed of their own silence earlier. Others murmured about the strange bravery of the human. A few still doubted, unwilling to believe that someone so small could achieve such greatness. Daniel stood quietly, not seeking their approval. He knew what he had done, and that was enough. The queen lifted her hand again, the glowing light of her armor reflecting off the walls. "From this day," she declared, "this human is no longer a silent observer. He has earned a place among us." The announcement shocked the room. Guards exchanged surprised looks. The craftsmen lowered their eyes. A human, accepted by the queen herself. It was unheard of. Daniel felt the weight of her words settle on him. He hadn't come here seeking honor or status. He had only wanted to help. Yet now the path before him was no longer simple observation. The queen had seen him, truly seen him, and had chosen to acknowledge his worth. As the chamber slowly emptied, whispers followed him like shadows. Some called him reckless, others brave. Some feared what his presence might mean, others felt curiosity. But all agreed on one truth: the human had answered the Queen's roar. When the hall finally quieted, Daniel found himself alone for a brief moment. He looked at his hands, still stained with grease, and let out a slow breath. He knew his life had just changed in ways he could not yet understand. Above him, the repaired armor hummed steadily on the Queen's body, a reminder of the risk he had taken. It was no longer just her symbol of power, it was also proof of his courage. And deep inside, Daniel knew this was only the beginning. The day after the repair, the Queen summoned Daniel to her council chamber. It was a wide hall shaped like a circle, its walls glowing with shifting colors that reminded him of deep space nebulae. At the center stood the Queen on a raised platform, her armor now shining with full strength, every line of energy flowing perfectly. Around her sat generals, advisors, and scientists, all waiting to hear his explanation. Daniel walked in quietly, aware of the dozens of eyes on him. He felt their judgment before anyone spoke. To them, he was still just a human, too small and too weak to be part of their world. Yet here he was, called to stand before their ruler. The Queen gestured for silence. Her voice was sharp and commanding as always. "Tell us, human, how did you succeed where my finest craftsmen refused to try?" Daniel stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't speak quickly. Instead, he let his eyes pass over the armor once more, as if checking his work again before answering. Then he spoke clearly. "Machines, no matter how advanced, follow patterns. They breathe in their own way, through energy, through connections, through flow. When something breaks, fear stops most people from touching it. But fear does not repair anything. Focus does. I studied your armor's channels, learned how energy moved, and changed the broken paths into stronger ones." His words were simple, yet they carried weight. The generals frowned, some unimpressed. The scientists leaned forward, curious about his method. The Queen, however, listened more closely than anyone. "Show us," one advisor demanded. "Explain as if we were students." Daniel didn't hesitate. He stepped toward the holographic projector in the center of the hall. With a few touches, the image of the Queen's armor appeared, glowing in bright lines. He pointed to the cracked areas. Here, the energy paths were overloaded. Instead of forcing them back into place, I redirected them, like water flowing around rocks in a river. Then I strengthened the weak points with bonding methods my people use on damaged satellites. Not the same material, but the same principle. The room grew quiet as they followed his explanation. Even the most doubtful among them began to realize that his methods weren't just luck. He had understood their technology in a way that made sense even to those who had studied it for years. The Queen finally spoke, her voice lower now, almost thoughtful. "You speak as though machines are alive." Daniel nodded. "In their own way, they are. Not with hearts or voices, but with patterns and flows. If you listen carefully, they tell you what they need." Those words surprised even the Queen. For a moment, silence filled the hall again. Then one of the generals scoffed. "Machines, do not speak. This is human foolishness." But the Queen raised her hand, silencing him. Her eyes never left Daniel. "Perhaps it is foolishness," she said slowly, "but it is the kind that fixed what none of you would dare touch." The weight of her words struck the room like a hammer. The generals looked down, ashamed. The scientists whispered among themselves, eager to learn more. And the advisors exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the Queen had just raised a human above them all. Daniel didn't smile, nor did he boast. He simply stood quietly, his explanation complete. He wasn't there for recognition, he was there because the work mattered. That small truth impressed the Queen more than anything else. In her world, most who succeeded wanted rewards or titles. But this human, fragile in body yet steady in spirit, wanted nothing more than to see a broken thing made whole again. When the council ended, the Queen dismissed everyone but Daniel. As the chamber emptied, the two of them stood alone, Her towering figure looked down at him, but her voice softened in a way no one else ever heard. "You are different," she said. "Not strong like my soldiers, not clever like my advisors. Yet in your hands my armor lives again." Daniel looked up, meeting her eyes. "Strength takes many forms," he said simply. For the first time, the queen did not reply with thunder. Instead, she remained silent, her gaze lingering on him as if trying to see deeper into the quiet human who had changed everything with steady hands and honest words. Daniel left the chamber knowing something important had shifted. The queen no longer saw him as an outsider. She saw him as someone worth listening to. And that was more powerful than any title he could ever receive. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's life changed completely. No longer was he just a silent observer from Earth. The queen now called on him often, asking for his help not only with her armor, but with other machines that powered her empire. At first, the soldiers and advisors doubted him, but every time they brought him a challenge, he solved it with patience and skill. Slowly, doubt turned into respect. He repaired ships that had been left useless after battles. He restored tools that farmers needed on distant colonies. He even improved small devices in the palace that no one had thought twice about. Wherever Daniel went, broken things became whole again. People began to whisper his name, not with mockery, but with quiet admiration. The queen watched all of this, carefully. At first, she had only valued him for his skill, but as the weeks passed, she began to notice something else. Unlike her generals, Daniel never sought power. Unlike her advisors, he never played games of politics. Unlike her soldiers, he never demanded recognition. He only worked, quietly and honestly, to help. One evening, after a long day of repairs, the queen called Daniel to the high balcony of her palace. From there, the two of them could see the endless stars, thousands of them glittering in the dark sky. The city below glowed with lights, alive with activity. The queen stood tall, her armor shining faintly in the starlight. "Do you know what I see when I look at these stars?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "What do you see?" "I see power," she said. "Each star, each world, is a piece of the galaxy waiting to be claimed, ruled, and defended. My duty is to keep them under control to make sure my people survive." She paused, her voice quieter now. "But sometimes when I wear this armor, I forget the weight it carries. Until you repaired it, I did not realize how much I depended on it. You reminded me that even the strongest symbols can break, and even the strongest leaders need help." Daniel listened quietly, his hands resting on the balcony rail. "Even the stars need each other," he said softly. "One shines, but together they light up the whole sky." The queen looked at him for a long moment. His words were simple, but they carried truth that even her wisest advisors often missed. From that night onward, her respect for Daniel deepened. She no longer saw him as just a skilled engineer. She saw him as a companion in thought, someone who spoke with honesty when others only tried to please her. When word of his deeds spread across the empire, stories began to form. They spoke of the human who answered the queen's roar, the one who fixed her sacred armor and changed her view of humanity forever. Some told the tale with admiration, others with disbelief. But all agreed it was a turning point. Daniel himself never sought fame. To him, each repair was simply another puzzle, another chance to make something broken whole again. But deep in his heart, he knew that his courage on that first day had not only changed his fate, it had also shaped the bond between two worlds. And so, the story of the lone human engineer became a legend, told across the stars. The day the alien queen roared and a human answered,